Her eyes still moved. Her lips, pale and trembling, seemed to form words even though the sword had already severed her head from her body. Some in the crowd gasped, others fainted, while a few cheered as blood poured onto the scaffold. This was not simply an execution. It was a performance. A calculated spectacle meant to crush not only a woman's life, but her very memory. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, wife of Henry VIII, and mother to a child who would one day rule the nation, was reduced to a public warning. Why was a woman once crowned in Westminster Abbey now mocked as an adulteress and witch? Why did a king who once risked his throne for her now demand her erasure from history? To answer, we must step back, into the world of Tudor England. The year is 1536. England is a kingdom in turmoil, standing at the crossroads of religion, politics, and dynastic ambition. Europe itself is a battlefield of faith. The Protestant Reformation has torn Christendom apart, and kings across the continent are forced to choose sides. At the center of this storm sits King Henry VIII. Proud, impulsive, and desperate for a son, he has already broken away from the Pope in Rome to secure his marriage to Anne Boleyn. It was a gamble of breathtaking audacity, challenging centuries of papal authority, excommunicating himself, and reshaping England's church forever. And had been his prize, the woman for whom he risked excommunication and rebellion. Yet in the Tudor world, a queen's value was measured in heirs, not in charm or intellect. And gave him Elizabeth, a healthy daughter, but not the son Henry craved. Around the throne, rival factions sharpened their knives. Nobles who had once courted Anne's favor now whispered against her. And in the shadows, Thomas Cromwell, the king's ruthless minister, saw an opportunity. If Anne could be removed, Henry would be free to wed again. The court became a theater of betrayal. Old allies turned silent, friends vanished overnight, and the woman who had been queen for barely 3 years suddenly found herself surrounded by enemies. This was not just the story of a marriage gone wrong. It was a clash between ambition and survival, between one woman's rise and a kingdom's demand for stability. And at its center, Anne Boleyn, the most powerful and most vulnerable woman in England. Anne Boleyn was not born to be a queen. She was the daughter of a minor nobleman, educated in the glittering courts of Burgundy and France, where she learned the art of charm, wit, and political finesse. Unlike the docile, obedient ladies expected in Tudor England, Anne was sharp-tongued, ambitious, and unafraid to challenge convention. When she returned to England, she caught the king's eye. But unlike many women before her, Anne refused to be merely a mistress. She demanded more. For Henry, this only deepened the obsession. What began as flirtation became a revolution. To have Anne, Henry broke with the Pope, overturned centuries of tradition, and crowned her Queen of England in 1533. For a brief moment, Anne stood at the very center of power. She was not just Henry's wife, she was his partner in reshaping the nation. She encouraged religious reform, patronized scholars, and wielded influence over court appointments. To her supporters, she was the dawn of a new England. But the glitter of coronation masked a looming shadow. 3 years into her reign, Anne had given birth only to a daughter, Elizabeth. Miscarriages followed, and with each loss, Henry's patience thinned. His eye began to wander toward other women. Whispers spread in the court that the king had made a terrible mistake, that Anne was cursed, even that God himself disapproved of the marriage. And had once been Henry's greatest triumph. Now, she was becoming his greatest liability. And though she still wore a crown, her throne was beginning to crack beneath her. But Anne could not yet see how swiftly the tide would turn. By the spring of 1536, Anne Boleyn's world was collapsing. Her charm, once magnetic, now seemed brittle. Every miscarriage deepened Henry's disappointment, and every rival at court sharpened their daggers. His wandering eye had already settled on Jane Seymour, a quiet, obedient lady-in-waiting who seemed the perfect opposite of Anne's fire. But it wasn't just jealousy that doomed her. It was politics. Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, recognized that Anne's influence threatened his own position. He began crafting a case against her, one so outrageous it seemed almost impossible to believe, and was accused of adultery with not one, but several men. Among them, poets, courtiers, even her own brother. She was charged with incest and treason, crimes so scandalous they stunned the kingdom. In truth, The evidence was fabricated. But truth mattered little when the king's will demanded otherwise. On May 2nd, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The same fortress where she had once prepared for her coronation now became her prison. Witnesses described her as calm, even laughing at moments, but beneath the composure was terror. Days stretched into weeks. Her execution was announced, then delayed, then rescheduled again. This uncertainty was no accident. It was psychological warfare, designed to break her spirit. Alone in her chambers, Anne prayed through sleepless nights, convinced that every dawn might be her last. Meanwhile, the men accused alongside her were tried and executed first. Their deaths ensured that Anne's guilt appeared undeniable. At court, her enemies remained silent, her allies vanished. Even Henry, the man who had once risked his throne for her, refused to grant her a private audience. To him, Anne was already dead. For a woman who had risen higher than any of her rivals, the fall was brutal. Once a crowned queen, she was now a condemned traitor awaiting the sword. And the walls of the tower seemed to close in tighter with each passing hour. May 19, 1536. Dawn breaks unusually bright over London. Inside the tower, Anne Boleyn has been awake for hours. She prays on her knees in the small chapel, lips moving steadily, her body trembling with exhaustion. Sleep has eluded her. The uncertainty of her fate has stretched her nerves to breaking. Finally, the door opens. The lieutenant of the tower informs her, the time has come, and rises, composed yet unervingly cheerful. Some witnesses describe her as laughing with her ladies-in-waiting. Historians today call it dissociation, a fractured calm, the mind's last defense against unbearable fear. She is led through corridors she once walked as a queen, the same stone passages that had echoed with triumph during her coronation. Now, guards flank her not to honor her but to ensure she cannot escape. Courtiers who once bowed to her avert their eyes, or worse, watch coldly, as though she were already erased. The scaffold on Tower Green is low, barely 3 feet off the ground. Unlike the towering platforms of legend, this stage is intimate. It keeps her close to the crowd, close enough to hear the jeers, to see the hatred in their faces. The atmosphere is carnival-like. This is not solemn justice. It is theater. A warning to every woman, every noble, every subject who might dare to rise too high. And mounts the platform. Tradition allows her a final speech. Carefully, she praises the king as a gentle sovereign lord, and admits no crime. To the crowd, it sounds submissive. But beneath her words lies quiet defiance. She acknowledges the law, not her guilt. Even at the edge of death, and refuses to confess to lies. The French swordsman, specially brought from Calais, waits silently. His blade is sharp, his movements precise. He is paid handsomely for his skill, chosen because an axe might take multiple blows. Mercy, the king's propagandists will later claim. In truth, it is spectacle, Henry ensuring his queen's death will be clean, controlled, and unforgettable. Anne kneels upright, not placing her head on a block. Blindfolded, she continues to move her lips in prayer. Her body is still, but her mind must be screaming, straining for the faintest sound of steel slicing air. The crowd hushes. A tense silence hangs. Then, with a swift horizontal stroke, the sword cleaves through flesh and bone. Witnesses recoil. For several horrifying seconds, her eyes and lips continue to move. Some claim she finished the prayer cut short by the blade. Others say her lips whispered words no one could hear. The executioner lifts her head by the hair, holding it aloft to show the crowd. Blood still pulses from the severed neck. The spectacle is complete. Her ladies rush forward, weeping, fumbling for a container to hold her remains. No coffin has been prepared. In desperation, they find an old arrow chest, an undignified box for a queen's broken body. The crowd disperses. For them, the show is over. For Anne, it is the end. She will be buried hastily in an unmarked grave beneath the chapel floor, her name struck from memory, her portraits destroyed, her emblems scraped from palace walls. But in that moment, beneath the May sun of 1536, England has witnessed not just the death of a queen, but the annihilation of a woman's identity, transformed into nothing more than a political message. Anne Boleyn's death was meant to erase her. Henry VIII ordered her portraits destroyed. Her badges and emblems were hacked from palace walls. Courtiers learned quickly that even speaking her name could invite suspicion. She was buried without ceremony, in an unmarked grave, as if she had never existed at all. But history is rarely so obedient. Anne's greatest failure in Henry's eyes, bearing only a daughter, would become her greatest triumph. That daughter, Elizabeth, grew to be one of England's most legendary monarchs. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, who presided over an age of exploration, culture, and power. The child whom Henry declared illegitimate would reign for nearly half a century, shaping the destiny of a nation. In this, and achieved a legacy Henry could never have imagined. Though he sought to silence her, every triumph of Elizabeth's reign whispered the name of her mother. But Anne's story is more than a family tragedy or a Tudor scandal. It is a warning. Her execution was not just the swing of a sword, it was the culmination of a campaign of propaganda, character assassination, and psychological warfare. Anne was not simply killed, she was unmade. Her life shows how power can manipulate truth, and how authority can bend reality until lies become law. And yet, the paradox is striking. Henry tried to erase Anne, but by destroying her so spectacularly, he made her unforgettable. Today, Anne Boleyn is remembered not as a traitor, but as a symbol of resilience, a woman who dared to rise, dared to influence, and paid the ultimate price. For us, her story resonates far beyond Tudor England. It forces a question. When those in power twist truth, rewrite narratives, or brand opponents as traitors, how easily do we accept their version of events? And what legacy is left when silence is imposed by fear? Anne's life and death remind us that freedom, memory, and truth are fragile. They survive only if we are willing to protect them. Anne Boleyn's death was not just a royal scandal. It was a lesson in how absolute power can twist truth, erase memory, and turn a human being into nothing more than a warning. Henry VIII believed he had silenced her forever. Yet 5 centuries later, we still speak her name. Her story survives because it forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, power, and the fragility of truth itself. So now, I'll leave you with this. If you had lived in Tudor England, would you have dared to defend Anne, or stayed silent, knowing silence was the safer choice? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them. And if you believe history is more than the past, if you believe its echoes still shape us today, then join this channel for more stories where truth and power collide.